Hi everyone, welcome to the countdown of my top 10 small towns in New York. Normally, I only give my opinions on these places by the music I write for them, but I thought it was about time I finally give my explanations of my favorite villages and why I like them so much. Now for this list, I will only be using villages, as that's the only non-arbitrary way to finalize the sample. That means some small cities and hamlets will be left out, like Beacon, Seneca Falls, Corning, among others. And to be clear, this list is the top 10 villages for you to visit, not necessarily to live. Of the 534 villages in New York, I've currently been to 322 of them, basically all the interesting ones. There are no metrics to this list. I'm just choosing my favorites and trying to convince you to like them and maybe visit them yourself, and maybe to get a good argument going in the comments. But you'll probably notice practically all of them are on water of some sort. So let's get right to it and start with number 10. Penn Yan sits at the northern end of Keuka Lake and is pretty much in the center of the whole Finger Lakes region. It's located between some of the other larger lakes, so it's in an area full of farms and wineries on pretty much all sides, and not a ton of mountains. It's more rolling hills. There are 2 waterfront parks, but downtown is a little more inland, right where the outlet river begins. And there's a very interesting unpaved trail that follows this outlet through the fields and ruins all the way to Dresden on Seneca Lake. The village is nowhere near any of the state's big cities, so it has quite a remote feel to it. But it is the seat of Yates County, so the buildings are substantial, and it does feel like there's more to town than just a few commercial blocks in the center. I do wish they could have incorporated the lake a little more into the town's identity, but it's still a great place to adventure to. Cold Spring sits along the Hudson River in Putnam County, and has a pretty small town feel, considering it's only about 35 miles north of New York City. But it abuts some incredible geography, right along a bend in the river at the Hudson Highlands, looking straight across at Crow's Nest Mountain and Storm King Mountain, and being right next to Breakneck Ridge, a popular rock scramble trail for day trippers in the area, with some special weekend rail stations for hikers nearby. Its main street features a bunch of antique shops and ice cream shops, interestingly enough, and it's a very popular destination in the summer months. And unlike Penn Yan, it has a much more significant waterfront. There are 2 parks, an esplanade, a pier, and a trail system at the West Point Foundry Preserve. Speaking of which, it's also right across the river from the famous military reserve of the same name, and it's also close to Little Stony Point, Constitution Island, and the Bannerman Castle, and it's an easy commute for people near the city to get away for a little while, and it's a great place to spend some time in. I was even at a movie night during a sunset in the summer of 2021, and the whole community was out there enjoying the ambience. It was really nice, and I hope you can check the place out yourself. Skaneateles is located at the northern end of Skaneateles Lake, the highest elevation and cleanest Finger Lake. It's a beautiful small village with some very interesting houses, churches, and a nice row of stores with their backs along the lakefront. Now, I will say, many of the tourism websites really tout and perhaps overrate this place, and the village sure seems overly geared towards tourists, especially in the summer. Obviously, it was very quiet during this winter storm in 2017. But most of the downtown businesses are restaurants and shops tailored towards the tourism industry. And outside the 3 to 4 blocks of downtown, the exciting touristy part peters out, and the density of streets is relatively low, as you can see here, long rows of houses. But there are 2 lakefront parks and a pier, and the lake is truly special and quite a gem, even if it's not a hidden gem. It's close to the cities of Auburn and Syracuse, but those are certainly not the same grandeur as New York City. So if you're nearby, you've got to check it out. It's time to talk about a village on Long Island. While most of the island is really dense in population, at the far eastern end are some smaller towns, many of which are beach-oriented, known as the Hamptons. Then, there are the more charming villages of Sag Harbor and Greenport, and in this list, I've got to give it to Greenport. Greenport's on the North Fork of the mainland of Long Island. I know that's an oxymoron. It's right on the Peconic Bay, facing Shelter Island, which can only be accessed by ferry. I actually took the pair of ferries from Sag Harbor to get there on this December day, which these clips are from. Yes, it's certainly a tourist-oriented town, with seafood restaurants all around, a boardwalk, and even a carousel, which I forgot to include in my other video, sorry. It certainly has a maritime feel, with many docks and boats all around, and I really enjoyed soaking it all in, and seeing this place filled with life, even in mid-December of 2019. It's also close to Orient Point, which is the far end of the North Fork, which, unlike the beachy feel of the Southern Fork, has a more agricultural feel to it. You can even take a ferry there from New London, Connecticut. So next time you're headed to Montauk or the Hamptons, be sure to stop by Greenport as well on the North Fork. When you go to the Thousand Islands region, it feels like you're an eternity away from New York City. This region is along the St. Lawrence River on the border with Canada, and the towns right off the river offer absolutely picturesque views and ambience, filled with shiny water and tons of small islands and gems within them. The view from Alexandria Bay probably can't be matched by anything, especially with the Bolt Castle right there in sight. But when we talk about the best village all around, I've got to say it's Clayton. While you don't see quite as many islands, the view is more grand, as the water at that point is wider. There's considerably more of a substantial feel to town than in Alexandria Bay or nearby Cape Vincent. The downtown's bigger and slightly better catered to visitors and tourists, and the houses are in grids, it's more walkable, and there's a nice central park. There's one waterfront park with a nice pavilion with the village name, just in case you forget. And they have concerts there, like many nice waterfront towns have, creating a nice summer community atmosphere. It's hard to go wrong in the Thousand Islands, but definitely don't skip Clayton if you're nearby or traveling in from Ontario. Watkins Glen is certainly the most intriguing village in the Finger Lakes, and tourists flock here every year to bask in the midst of Seneca Lake, the largest Finger Lake, and also to the incredible collection of waterfalls in Watkins Glen State Park, which is my favorite New York State Park. You won't find any gigantic falls here, but it's the most grand ravine trail in the region, following all the ins and outs of the Glen Creek, including underneath the waterfall, and hope there isn't a line to get through that. There are 2 lakefront parks and a campground, as well as the unmistakable gazebo with the name of the lake on it. There are many boating opportunities, including sunset cruises with live music, and there's also the NASCAR Speedway just outside of town, bringing even more people to the area at various times of the year. The residential areas are laid out nicely, with a 1 square block Central Park, a wildlife sanctuary just to the east of town, and a bike trail to the next village over of Montour Falls, which has an even larger waterfall right there in town. The only problem I could think of with Watkins Glen is that it's also an important thoroughfare in the region, so there could be some considerable traffic downtown, especially with trucks. There are a couple salt factories nearby, one in town, but they're not too intrusive. In fact, I'm glad to see that industry still exists in this region at all. Many tourism websites tout this village too, especially the state park, and for a good reason, and I hope you can see it for yourself someday. The Adirondacks seem like an endless reserve of mountains, lakes, hiking, and picturesque remote living in some of the northernmost reaches of New York State. In terms of villages, Lake Placid has received the most attention by far, as it hosted 2 Winter Olympics in the 20th century, and from there, they've turned it into a tourist paradise. Main Street is packed during the summers, with gift shops, pizza, ice cream, restaurants, and regular businesses. Downtown sits right on Mirror Lake, a small lake which has 3 waterfront parks, a beach, a boat launch, and even hotels. The lake with the actual name Lake Placid is about a half-mile north of downtown, and it's much more sparse. But all around the area, you can find relics to the Olympics, like the hockey arena, the speed skating oval, bobsled run, and ski jump. And of course, no matter where you go, you're always surrounded by mountains, and it feels like you're completely disconnected from the rest of society. Within just a short distance from anywhere in town, you could be at a hiking trail, a lake, a stream, a place to ski, a forest, or the complete wilderness. You'll love it here. Now we head closer to New York City. Westchester County is directly north of the Bronx, and one of the nicest parts is known as the River Towns, right along the Hudson River north of Yonkers. The cultural center of this region is the village of Tarrytown, and has the highest population and largest commercial district of all of them. There are many businesses and activities around downtown, and 3 waterfront parks, including perhaps the nicest one along the Hudson River at Pearson Park. Feel free to argue in the comments. The Old Croton Aqueduct, a linear unpaved trail, runs through town, and there are more nature preserves up the hill near the reservoir and Old Marymount Convent campus. At the southern end of town is Sunnyside, Washington Irving's residence, and just northeast of town lies Kykuit, the Rockefeller residence. And also, directly north of town lies the neighboring village of Sleepy Hollow, with many famous locations, and it's well known for the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, written by Washington Irving. and many of the locations from that story are in both villages. Downtown Sleepy Hollow has a more urban feel, though, so I give the nod to Tarrytown. The Tappan Zee Bridge also crosses the Hudson River into Tarrytown, so you could easily bike or even walk across to the nice villages of Nyack and Piermont on the other side. Just beware, though, the bridge is longer than you think. There is an increasing amount of luxury housing near the water, but it doesn't block the public access, and you could walk all the way from Tarrytown to the lighthouse in Sleepy Hollow, where they're still redeveloping their waterfront. I'm a little biased both for and against Tarrytown, since I live right nearby, but I believe this is objectively a wonderful place, and people love to come by in the fall, especially around Halloween, but I hope you come whenever you get the chance. I know all of you have heard about Cooperstown. It makes national news every year due to it being the location of the Baseball Hall of Fame. It's located here due to the pretty much debunked myth of it being the location of the first baseball game ever, or at least in the country. But the town undeniably has a big baseball history, so it still makes sense. And in town, there are tons, and I mean tons, of baseball-themed stores and scenery. And you can still go to the famous Doubleday Field and even watch a game. Not a major league game, but some organized game of some sort. But beyond baseball, the village is absolutely beautiful. It's right on the southern end of Otsego Lake, which feels an awful lot like a Finger Lake, but it's 65 miles east of those. It's also in one of the most remote parts of the state, outside maybe the Adirondacks and Catskills, so it feels like you're in a town in the middle of absolutely nowhere. The largest nearby city is Oneonta, nearly 20 miles south, which only has 13,000 people anyway. Otherwise, we're talking about 3 very small villages about 10 miles away in each direction, but mostly, mountains and farms are what you're going to find anywhere nearby. You can hardly find a dull spot in town, with 2 waterfront parks, the headwaters of the mighty Susquehanna River, the Otesaga Resort, a monument to James Fenimore Cooper, the son of the village's namesake, and the charming streets throughout. And there are many other tourist attractions around the lake too, like the Farmers Museum and Fenimore Art Museum just north of town, as well as the Glimmerglass Opera Festival and Glimmerglass State Park at the lake's northern end. This whole place is absolutely beautiful year-round, although the snow can be a little difficult to maneuver in the winter. I've actually been here twice in the snow, and it can come down very quickly and suddenly. I've never been there for a Hall of Fame induction ceremony, but I imagine it's very crowded then. But it looks like a great time for everyone, so I hope you get your chance to make your way to Cooperstown. It's quite remote, but it's not overly far from most of the major cities. Okay, so if I haven't named your favorite village so far, hopefully I name it here on the 10 honorable mentions list. But now it's time for my number 1 village. Obviously, it'll be controversial since everyone will have their own favorites. But for anyone who watched my interview with Nick Johnson, you'll know it's Owego. Owego is a small, charming village along the Susquehanna River, and it is the seat of Tioga County, roughly 18 miles west of Binghamton, 25 miles south of Ithaca, and 27 miles east of Elmira. Pretty much everything in town has a historic feel to it, but unlike all of the other villages on this list, this one does not have the same kind of tourist vibe to it. Yes, over the years, more and more tourist signs have been erected, but in Owego, you have a much more authentic feel, and you're seeing more of the life that the people there live, and not as much of tourists. The water isn't blue, the river is rather muddy, and it's a much more gritty part of the state than the other places I've talked about. This area is known as the Southern Tier, comprising of cities and towns that fit the Rust Belt stereotype way more than the Finger Lakes or Adirondacks or downstate regions. But it's actually passed by many people driving to or from Ithaca, from Binghamton, or even Scranton, so you do get traffic at the bridge sometimes. But in turn, you get people driving by and looking on curiously, and later stopping in to look around. That's actually how I first discovered this place. I've always enjoyed the historic and community atmosphere here, from the classic county courthouse in the center of town, to the Riverwalk behind a row of commercial buildings, very similar to what's in Skaneateles, to the history museums on Front Street, to the churches, to the historic homes, combined with the more modest houses of people just living their lives, to interesting garden decorations, to the multiple layers of downtown businesses, to the mountaintop cemetery, to seeing people enjoying fishing or the fairgrounds, even with no fair going on, to seeing the Little League fields filled with players, and then to see them all heading straight to the same ice cream parlor after the game. These are just, well, as Rodgers and Hammerstein say, just some of my favorite things. In other words, these are the things I want to see when I explore my backyard, or the region, or the state or country I live in, or explore the Northeast, the name of the channel. I really wish I could explain this better, but I know there's something to this place that the people who see it really enjoy. When I started this channel in 2018, my Owego video had the most views for my first year, and in 2009, Owego was voted as the coolest small town in America in Budget Travel magazine. Not sure what the metrics or methodology were, but there's something about Owego that undeniably captures the hearts of those who visit. They do have one tourist event every June called the Strawberry Festival, and I've never been able to go, but I hope I can someday and get a chance to see what this place is like when it's crowded. I'd also like to see it in the snow too, but we'll see. The only downside is that when you talk about this place to people, you have to clear up the confusion pertaining to the similarly named city in New York named Oswego, but you'll get over it. Places like this often get looked down upon by people on the outside, but I hope you'll be open-minded and see what makes this place both unique and at the same time, perhaps the quintessential New York village. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed this list, whether you agree or disagree or learned something new. Feel free to post your favorite villages in the comments, or argue about my list, and let me know what you thought about this video. I might make more videos in the future where I talk about other states, not sure how frequently yet. We'll be back to our regular content soon. Thanks for watching.